Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Taisus Dibur Maschel Umay Shno. Let's begin by looking at the flowchart of the Gemara so we could see what Taisus is coming to explain. So here in the Gemara, we had a conversation between Rava and Rav Nachman, and Rava asked Rav Nachman, what's the difference that in the case when a person lifted up an item while standing in Rosh Hashanah, extended his hand out into Rosh Hashanah, what's the reason that it says Asur Lahachziro, he's not allowed to bring it back into a different Rosh Hashanah, and Mutar Lahachzir is permitted to bring it back into his own Rosh Hashanah? Why do we distinguish between bringing it back to a different Rosh Hashanah or to his own Rosh Hashanah? Rav Nachman explained that it's a sort of a gzeira, it's a concern that if we permit the person to bring it back to a different Rosh Hashanah, he accomplished his goal, he removed it from where he is, and ultimately, in the long term, in the future, could lead that he'll actually bring it to Rosh Hashanah. So what we do is we obligate the person to bring it back to his own Rosh Hashanah, basically making a statement that he can't accomplish what he intended to, and that way he creates a boundary and a safeguard that in the future he won't come to carry it out into Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. So the question originally that Tosfos is going to focus on is the question that Rava asked Rav Nachman, Umay Shno, what's the difference? So let's begin with a general outline of Tosfos. The Gemara asked, was the question of Rava, why is it also to carry to a different Rosh Hashanah and mutter to its own Rosh Hashanah? And Tosfos will address the question that is actually a tremendous difference, because the din is that to carry from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah through a Rosh Hashanah is actually asur min haTorah. So what was Rava's question to Rav Nachman? Umay Shno, what's the difference? There's a very big difference. One is asur min haTorah and one isn't. So let's see Tosfos in the flowchart. So we had the question of Rava to Rav Nachman, what's the difference that to another Rosh Hashanah it's asur, and to his own Rosh Hashanah it's mutter? Why is it? Why don't we permit him to bring it to another Rosh Hashanah as well? So it says Tosfos, it's an arrow because he doesn't actually articulate the question, but he's addressing a question, and he says it's talking about on two sides of the street. When we say that he's not allowed to bring it to a different Rosh Hashanah, he's permitted to bring it to his own Rosh Hashanah, it's not referring to Rosh Hashanah on the same side of the street, rather it's referring to, it's also to bring it to a Rosh Hashanah across the street. And why do we have to say this? Because otherwise it's very different bringing it to a different Rosh Hashanah to his own. Rava would never ask what's the difference, since there's an asur min haTorah. For a person to carry from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah on the same side of the street, a row of porches through a Rosh Hashanah, is asur min haTorah. So Rava would never have asked Rav Nachman, why is it permitted to bring it back to his own Rosh Hashanah and not to another Rosh Hashanah on the same side of the street through a Rosh Hashanah? So therefore we have to say that the case Rav Nachman, when he said it's asur, is referring to any Rosh Hashanah, including to one across the street, and that's the one that Rava was addressing. Why is it asur to take it to that Rosh Hashanah and mutter to take it to his own? That's one way of understanding what was the Rosh Hashanah over here and what type of Rosh Hashanah did it involve, that therefore the question of Rava is valid to ask what's the difference. And a second possible way of understanding it is that we're talking about that it's actually on one side of the street, but there's no Rosh Hashanah in between. So there's two Rosh Hashanahs that were adjacent to one another, with no Rosh Hashanah in between. The individual extended his hand out into the Rosh Hashanah, and we're saying it's asur for him to bring it to the Rosh Hashanah that's adjacent to his. It's not by way of Rosh Hashanah, and it's mutter to bring it to his own. And to that, Rava asked Rav Nachman, what's the difference? And Rav Nachman gave the answer that he gave. So to summarize, Tosfos explained how is it possible to present a case where the question of Rava would be valid to ask what's the difference between a different Rosh Hashanah and bringing it to his own. If bringing it to a different Rosh Hashanah is very different, being that it's actually asur min haTorah. And Tosfos presented two instances, two cases where it would not be asur min haTorah, and there the question of Rava would be valid. And those are either that it's across the street to other Rosh Hashanah, although it's by way of Rosh Hashanah, but it's across the street, and that's not asur min haTorah, or it's on the same side of the street, but it's not the two Rosh Hashanahs are not separated by Rosh Hashanah, and then there's no asur min haTorah.